Hey guys, and welcome back to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. I'm, of course, your co-host, Ray Russell, here as we jump back into 1979, away from Southeastern and over to the brand new All-Star Wrestling Upstart promotion. And to talk all about that here this week, let's bring him back onto the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, Bob Roop.
Well, hello again out there, Ray, and all our listeners out there. Good to be back with you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to what we're talking about today. Let's bring back some real memories with some new faces in the mix. You know, in the middle of our radical, what was considered heresy in the wrestling business, was to, go against the reigning order of things, which was the promoters doing whatever they wanted to do with you. You're just taking it, and we decided that we weren't going to do that any longer. So that's what we're going to talk about today for a little while.
Yeah, we certainly are. So we've addressed a lot of the comments made over on the Ron Fuller podcast in the past, and I think we've gotten to the point where you've kind of refuted, rebutted, and just corrected a lot of things to the point where we don't really need to continue to explain away all the things being said over there because, well, you got your own promotion now, and anything he would have said at this point forward would have been guessing.
Let me interrupt you because I'm glad you reminded me. I did want to touch on one subject we talked about last time, because Fuller had made the comment that I got everybody together and told a bunch of people about what we were going to be doing. And I wanted to say just how ridiculous that was, because for credibility, what happened way back when I tried to, working with Roy Shire's local promoters who came to me and asked me to go opposition to Shire's because they hated him. Out there, what happened was that among the group that I included in doing the takeover and on the talent, I had a buddy named Carl von Steiger. He had a partner named Kurt von Steiger, who I didn't know very well. And so Kurt got included because I included Carl, and Carl, I guess, included Kurt, or I remember talking to both of them. Well, Kurt was the one that Roy Shire told me that Kurt von Steiger was the guy that had come to him and told him. So knowing that, when I get to Knoxville, I'm going to be very, very careful about who I tell. And, about now we're going to try to go opposition to Fuller. Even Slater, I checked out with Bobby Orton before I ever approached Slater.
Right.
I was talking to Bobby about what he thought, because he knew Slater a lot better than I did. And I asked him to sound him out to see what he thought before I even told Slater, because again, I didn't know him very well. Otherwise, it was Malenko, Garvin, myself, and Bobby were the four, assuming that Ron Wright and Don Wright would come along because they weren't being booked by Fuller. So Bobby talked to Slater, and I mean, otherwise I would have never taken Slater to Tampa with me to that union meeting, unless I thought he was part. I mean, yeah, I'm going to take the guy who's going to be my lead opposition to what I'm trying to do. I'm going to take him right to the meeting that is the most important part of what I've got planned. I'm going to just take him along, just for the hell of it. And I was convinced that Slater had basically told me right up front, look at me in the eye. Yeah, he said, yeah, I'm interested, because I'd asked him. So I wanted to just refute that part of Ron Fuller's saying that I had gotten to get all the boys together and talk to them about going opposition, because it wouldn't be 10 seconds after that meeting was over that their news would be out. At least somebody, 1, 2, 3, would be on the phone, telling somebody, oh, they're going opposition in Knoxville, because the wrestlers love to talk. Telephone, telegraph, tell a wrestler. I want to refute that part, because if I can refute any part of what's been said against me, then it lends some doubt about the rest of it too.
I think we've kind of shut down a lot of the things that were said, even complete inaccuracies in regards to the booking or what was going on at the time. And again, Ron Fuller started everything off, and every episode that he discussed this in saying that I think this happened, and then he would lend credibility as to why he thought maybe this happened. Of course, later on he said, well, the wrestlers came to me and told me for a fact that, this happened, or whomever he would use, Les Thatcher or random so-and-so told him this or told him that. So that's really where all of his stuff comes from, because he really wasn't even in the territory during a lot of this. So luckily for us, we've moved past that, though. You're out of Southeastern, and All-Star is, boom, it has been created. And as you talked about a little bit on the last episode, it was hard going to get some television. However, thankfully, there was a former announcer that had worked for Knoxville prior to Ron Fuller purchasing the territory. And he was there for a little bit afterwards as well, I believe. But a guy by the name of Big Jim Hess, going to get some pops out there for the old school Knoxville fans, I'm sure. Jim Hess, who had done pretty much everything, a jack of all trades in the TV industry in the Knoxville territory, or the Knoxville area, I should say. At this point in his life, he was a sales representative for WTVK, which allowed him to use his connections along with the popularity of Ron Wright in the area. They go to the television station and they lock in a TV program for you guys there on All-Star Wrestling, going to air on WTVK channel 26 in Knoxville. You guys also wind up grabbing WKPT 19 in the Tri-Cities in Kingsport, and then WKYH 57 in Hazard, Kentucky. Now, all of those are UHF stations. Meanwhile, Ron Fuller has VHF, like WBIR 10 in Knoxville. So for those who are new school and not so much old school, they don't know the difference. What's UHF? What is this guy talking about? UHF was not as powerful as the VHF stations.
Like a local broadcast. They didn't have, certainly didn't have satellite. No, back then, I know very few people did. A couple of places in the country, but I'm just curious what happened. I wonder if you and I talked before we opened up, and my memories of that are they're starting to come back. But I'm curious why we didn't continue with it. I'm curious. I wonder if we had to pay for it. I wonder if we had to buy the time. I'm just curious if we had the TV, unless it wasn't working, maybe there wasn't enough response. Anyway, I don't remember. I'm sorry to say.
No, I have no idea how long your TV lasted, but there is some of it out there on YouTube. People can go check it out, All-Star Wrestling. It's going to have Bob Orton, Bob Roop, Randy Savage. The hosts are Jim Hess and, wouldn't you know, Ron Wright as the color man. So that's a fun little tandem there. A couple of familiar faces to the Knoxville fans anyway out there hosting the show. And Ron Wright kind of playing a straight guy. He's not necessarily a heel, at least at this point in time, on the TV that exists. And, of course, the likes of Ron Garvin, Bob Roop, Bob Orton Jr., the great Malenko out there initially as well. Terry Gibbs has jumped over, and Terry Gibbs going to get a little push here. You guys are throwing Terry a bone, and he's running with it. Got some promos and matches on there from Terry as well on the YouTube. Roger Smith comes in as the assassin. Don Wright going to work a little here, of course. Don and Ron were a legendary team in that territory. And of course, you guys immediately joined forces with another promotion that had just started a couple months prior to you by the name of the ICW, International Championship Wrestling, which was owned by Angelo Poffo. And he, along with his two sons, Lanny Poffo and Randy Mario Poffo, which you guys may know better as the Macho Man Randy Savage. Yeah. Randy Savage immediately joins forces along with Lanny and the miser, Angelo Poffo, and they join up with All-Star and they begin working cards for All-Star Wrestling.
That was a real good thing to have. Those guys were available to go to work with us. Otherwise, we probably, I don't know if it's good or not. You look back and you think, what would have happened if we hadn't had them to lean on, to get with in order to it was hard. It was hard for us to just quit after making the statement that we had when we started having trouble. And when I say quit, because the NWA went to war against us. Jim Crockett in the Carolinas and over Jarrett or whoever over in Tennessee, Barnett in Georgia and Eddie Graham in Florida, they were all sending talent in. We could see where things were going. Their cards kept getting bigger and bigger. And we had the same, so to have the Poffos come along and have some new faces, especially like Randy, although, he wasn't the Macho Man yet. I mean, he wasn't famous yet.
Right.
But he was a good talent. He was somebody you could make famous. You could push.
He was certainly prominently featured on the TV almost immediately because he had it. You know, for all the stories we hear that take place outside of the wrestling ring, outside of the arena with Randy Savage in those early years in the late 70s and early 80s prior to jumping to Memphis and working for Jerry Jarrett eventually. Randy Savage had, you know, like we were talking about off air, I told you a couple stories that are out there. I'm sure if you Googled it, those would be the first ones to pop up. He had stole some steaks, you know, from the grocery store I was telling you, or his incident with Bill Dundee out there in public that may or may not have involved a gun. There's some stories that are certainly wild and crazy, but certainly also believable in regards to Randy Savage. But one thing is for sure, based on the TV, the All-Star TV that is out there on YouTube, and based on the results we see here, Randy Savage is featured prominently on TV immediately, and then on the house shows, you guys kick off, you want to introduce him to the fans of Knoxville, but it doesn't take long for the Macho Man to move from the opening match to the main event.
Yeah, oh yeah, he was, I'd never heard of him before we met up with those guys. He hadn't been, as far as I know, he hadn't been anywhere I'd been, let's put it that way. And he was a good talent. Lanny, like his brother, was decent. He didn't have it, like you say, he didn't have that star factor like Randy did.
Right.
Lanny didn't. But he was, you know, he looked the part. He was athletic, nice looking. I know what Randy had that Lanny didn't. Randy was a natural heel. He could be either, but Lanny would have a hard time being a heel. He would have to really work at it to be a heel because he was kind of a gentle soul, poet, artistic. And Randy was hardcore. Randy was, what you saw with Randy was what you got. I very seldom ever saw him out of character. I'm talking about in private.
Right.
He was still doing Macho Man in private. I mean, the voice and everything. It was like weird. It's like, hey man, you know, the camera's not on, you know, you can relax. He was just, you talk about, those guys were so paranoid. Not Lanny, but Angelo Poffo and Randy were like a Siamese twins of paranoia and mistrust and suspicion that everybody and everything was out to get them. Of course, being in that position of going opposition or being an outlaw group, I guess it was natural to feel that way. But there wasn't anybody coming after us, you know. I mean, they weren't mobilizing. They weren't getting David Schultz to come, you know, beat the crap out of somebody. You know, we didn't have to worry about physically. I don't think. I never felt threatened. But anyway, yeah, that was getting with Randy at that stage. He was the real deal. What you saw 10 years later, it was what we saw in the very beginning.
Right. It's so funny that you talk about him being wild and crazy because obviously we saw that throughout his entire career. And it's funny too, for anybody who follows any type of behind the scenes type stories about Randy Savage or any wrestling, they've probably heard someone somewhere at some point in the 80s, even throughout the 90s, claim that Randy Savage was very paranoid of his spot, paranoid of, you know, the wrestlers, paranoid of who's talking behind his back about what. They don't even need to have a reason. Randy was always paranoid. Jimmy Hart even stated that when he went to the WWF in 1985, when Jimmy went to the WWF in early 85, he was asked by Vince and company, all right, who's down there in Memphis that, you know, we could use here? And Jimmy Hart told Vince, you know, the greatest wrestler you've never seen is starving right now down in Memphis. And that's how Randy got booked to the WWF, was Jimmy Hart saying, hey, there's this guy that maybe you guys should take a look at. And so Jimmy was the one that kind of played the middleman and called Randy, hey, Randy, baby, you got to come up here. They're going to give you a job. And even then, Randy thought that even though Jimmy was working for New York and had pissed the Jarretts off by leaving Memphis and going to New York, that somehow Jimmy was working as an informant for Jerry Jarrett and trying to trick Randy into coming to New York so that Jarrett would fire him and be upset with him. I don't know if I trust this, Jimmy, You know, needless to say, he did make the jump and the rest is history.
Yeah, I believe that. Believe me, that sounds so real, so true, so authentic. Yeah, that was what Randy was like. I mean, he just, you know, if he stepped on a $1,000 bill he'd pick up, he'd look around and see, who was going to come jump on him. He was, no, this can't be true. So yeah, he was. And his dad was the same way.
So that's likely where he got it from. Was his father?
Oh
then?
yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. The dad. I heard the stories that when they were kids, the dad would take him. Angelo would take the boys with him on shows or whatever, and they wouldn't get a motel room. They would sleep in a car. And I guess if you had behaved yourself the best, you got to sleep in the trunk, or maybe the back seat was the one that was the best bed. But they were, Angelo was, when we worked together with ICW, he worked under the mask, as he called himself the miser.
Right.
And that was absolutely true. He was so tight, he wouldn't even give you a smile unless he stole some money from you. He would never smile. He was always glum and suspicious looking. So, yeah, that paranoia that everybody's out to get us was something that Randy, if he didn't get it genetically, he got it through environmental practice his whole life of having his dad like, oh, well, don't ever trust success, don't ever trust happiness because somebody's going to come out there and take it away from you. Which is one of the worst. That's such a curse you can put on your children.
Yeah. And it's like you said, if he didn't get it genetically, he grew up in it. It's funny. Yeah. I can't, Lanny never really got invested like Randy Savage did into things. So I don't know how Lanny's mind worked in regards to all of that, but he wasn't put in a position to where he could really show his paranoia or what. If anybody should be paranoid in that family, it should have been Lanny Poffo, who was doing jobs for Vince McMahon for years. Like, when is my job coming to an end here? I need to write another poetry book, or something like that.
Right.
So, but
Lanny, sounds like Lanny might have been, and this is pure speculation. Rest in peace, Lanny. Rest in peace, Randy. Lanny might have been a mama's boy. Maybe Dad didn't have the same kind of effect on Lanny that he did on Randy, but with Randy, he found a disciple for his paranoia and his suspicious nature and his conspiracy-minded thought that the world's out to get him. It wouldn't even have to be personal. It's impersonal, yeah. You can't trust anybody, especially around money. And in a sense, that's true. But it doesn't mean you have to spend your whole, every waking minute of every day, being on a lookout for somebody to screw you around. I think that's carrying it a little bit too far.
I'm just envisioning Randy Savage standing in front of me right now, looking to his left and right, back and forth. What's going on? Who's going to do what to me next? And so it begins, though. You guys form sort of a relationship with ICW, basically immediately right out of the gate. Randy Savage, we talked about it, and Lanny Poffo on your first show. And it's almost like a rib that Angelo gave himself, dubbing himself the miser under the hood, even putting a dollar bill sign on his gear at one point there during that gimmick. But it's so funny. People talk about the Macho Man in Memphis, the Macho Man, of course, in the WWF and beyond. You got to witness 2 straight years of Randy Savage before he made it anywhere, even to Jerry Jarrett's promotion. And so it's real fun to know that, no wonder, Bob, that you were like, oh, I don't know about this wrestling thing, but you stuck with it. Thank God. And we got the 1980s out of you as well. But I was looking at the talent here, and you guys had like a little faction of yourself, the guys that came over from Southeastern. You lump in Randy Savage and Lanny Poffo. Eventually, Angelo Poffo going to start wrestling with you guys as well. And then you got a nice little undercard. George McCreary coming up for matches. Of course, your longtime friend, George McCreary. Rick Connors, we talked about. Hoot Gibson, who is a solid hand. He just recently passed away, I do believe. Tony Peters is here. Devoy Brunson, who's getting a little bit of a push. I believe a friend of the Wrights, but he also worked underneath in Southeastern prior to this. A guy by the name of Chief Black Eagle, who I still haven't been able to nail down who that is. Jim Pride, who was a longtime Knoxville, Lexington guy. And Rick McCord is actually a very young Rick McCord who would do some things in the 80s, not a whole lot, but he was out there in the territories throughout some of the 1980s, and he's here working underneath as well for you guys. So you got some decent hands on TV to do the jobs for the big names. Also here in the summer, coming in, a very young Pistol Pez Whatley. Do you have any memories of Pez Whatley?
Oh yeah, Pez and I were buddies. We shared the misery together. We stayed. We shared a room in Lexington. I can't remember exactly where it was, but whatever it was real cheap. we rode together. I would usually drive. I don't think he had a car. I would drive. And we would commiserate with each other because nobody was making any money except maybe Angelo was able to put some money in the bank every month. The bookkeeping was so tight. I mean, we never saw anything but, final distribution of what we were going to be paid.
Right.
With no real accounting of, okay, this is how much we drew, then this is what you're getting paid. We had an arrangement that we made when we first went with them and started working together under ICW. We had an arrangement that we were going to, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but yeah, Pez was a lot of fun, good talent, a good guy. In times like that, where you're just miserable, really, because we had failed at our original purpose of was trying to run opposition in Knoxville and be successful at it as a basis for my personal desire. And nobody none of the guys with me were against it. They weren't just as adamant about it as I was. Ronnie and Malenko, for example, because they've been around a long time and they might have known deep down that the idea of a union just wasn't going to fly with the talent because of the balance of power in pro wrestling at the time, with the promoters basically having 99% of the power, and the talent having the only way you get any power from the wrestlers would be if everybody went on strike, and you never were going to get that to happen. But yeah, to have someone like Pez, and he was I think he had some amateur wrestling in his background.
Oh yeah, he went to Chattanooga, I do believe.
Yeah, and we had a bond there. Amateur wrestlers, I don't care if you do it just for 1 year in high school. If you are willing to spend the kind of time that it takes to get into shape, the physical condition to go out there for 4 minutes, which is a very short amateur match, but in high school, sometimes in the early part of the season, because they know wrestlers aren't in shape, sometimes, they haven't had time to get in the kind of shape they will after they wrestle for a few months, but the matches would be like in the opening tournaments for the year. Matches would be short, maybe 4 or 5 minutes. But even to be in shape to be able to go out there and wrestle for 4 or 5 minutes, you have to put in for every minute that you spend on the mat. You have to spend 100 hours of conditioning to be able to withstand that minute. And I mean, I'm talking about running, push-ups, sit-ups, calisthenics, and wrestling. Actually, wrestling against somebody in practice, in order to have that kind of shape. And the only reason I'm going on such length about that is because I haven't done it myself and know how hard it was. I respected people that were willing to make that sacrifice. You can't do it and not have character. I mean, you can be a jerk. I mean, not every wrestler is like a champion of a person, but you can't put out that kind of effort unless you have character. Now, sometimes, if I'm talking about negative, sometimes people did it for different reasons. Guys would be having an inferiority complex or trying to make up for it. One of the greatest wrestlers of all time in the United States, a guy named Dan Gable, who won the 1972 Olympics. He won his weight class. He wrestled 6 matches, and 3 of the matches he wrestled were against opponents who had either been world champions or had placed in the World Games as in the past, and he didn't have a point scored against him in 6 matches. It's just something like that's never been done before. I mean, you're talking about a level of excellence that just is unheard of. I mean, even Danny Hodge had points scored against him. But anyway, Dan Gable, his motivation was really a negative kind of a thing because he had a family tragedy where his sister was murdered when he was like a 8th, 9th grader. As a result of it, his family was having problems. In order to keep his family, his mom and dad, together and not have the family break up because of it, which happens very, very often sometimes in tragic situations like that. What he did was he got his mom and dad behind his wrestling activities. He never lost in high school and he didn't ever lose in college until his final match. So that's a different kind of motivation, what I'm talking about. He was doing it for kind of like a negative motivation. But regardless of what a person is motivated by, the discipline it takes to do that is something that I admire. So that, because I know myself how hard it is. So with Pez, just meeting him and knowing he'd been an amateur that wrestled in college, I had respect for him, because there's no way you can do that unless you put in the time and the effort and the work and the sweat. And another thing, wrestling is not tennis or swimming or, a non-contact sport. It's about as intimate as you can get. You grab a person from one top of their head down the bottom to their feet during the match. So, yeah, my hat's off to, and that was one thing that was with Pez. I was able to feel comfortable with him right away because we were both amateur wrestlers.
Yeah, and he was all around good guy from my understanding as well.
Oh, yeah.
Pez. And I think if I remember, in research I did on him prior, I think he was the first African-American wrestler at the University of Chattanooga. So he broke some barriers there. And he would go on to be a power lifter after that for just a little while, because he was a short guy, but he was a stocky guy, man. And he could go, and he had one of the greatest drop kicks of all time. Almost did like a backflip out of the drop kick. I loved watching Pez work, and so underrated. And I think he just never made it. Although he did get a good push with Crockett at one point, but I don't think he ever really made it to where he could have been, simply because he was 5'10" at best. And I think, his height hurt him in the big times, at least after the national expansion anyway.
Well, maybe his amateur wrestling was a detriment to him, because it was to a lot of amateurs that went into pro wrestling. It was hard for him to become I don't want to say not fake or anything, but it was hard for him to assume a persona of someone else.
Well, he did a good job by the 80s. He caught on because he did some fun things.
Well, you're right. What I'm thinking about, if I were, I didn't see what he was like later in his career, because after 82, I don't remember ever seeing him again. But I know that the black wrestlers that got over all over the country were people who could interview. Thunderbolt Patterson and Ernie Ladd were two I could come to mind. Mm-hmm. And later on, Butch Reed and Ron Simmons did good interviews. But Thunderbolt had his style, and Dusty Rhodes. You see Dusty Rhodes, you see Thunderbolt, and vice versa. And Ernie had not quite the same style, but Ernie made these, that great big hulking physical specimen made these interviews and interviews was what sold tickets, not being put over on TV in a match.
Right.
What kind of interview you do?
Well, they call it talking people into the arena.
Yes, yes, exactly. And Ernie would make these, I talk about it still to this day, of him being in Florida or somewhere in the South and saying things and doing interviews and saying something like, "White boy, come on down to the match and I'm going to put some steak on your butt," or something like that. I heard that, I read that, and I thought, oh my God, you talk about a guy who's got guts. Because, just because you're big doesn't mean that makes you. I said it the other day when I was talking about Andre the Giant. Yeah. What a great target he was. There's a big problem. It's really great if you're just doing all you're doing is hand-to-hand stuff. But if the other guy's got a gun, really, you don't want to be any bigger than you absolutely have to be. So yeah, Pez was a good hand and a good guy. He was fun to be with.
Yeah, I know there's some video footage of him out there. He kind of replayed. Remember, we talked about you coming out of the box or sitting in the box covered in tar and feather. There's an incident where Pez is doing the same thing in ICW. I think it was in the box. And this is obviously later on after you, because you did it in Southeastern. But Pez does it there, and they recreate it. And he's like dressed, and he's put in a dress, and he's wearing like a mop for a wig. And it's they're humiliating him, obviously. But I just I get a kick out of that. And then later on in Crockett, they'll turn him heel and be part of Paul Jones' army, feuding with Jimmy Valiant and silliness like that they do in the mid-'80s. And he'd go on to actually be one of the trainers for WCW's Power Plant throughout the 90s. So Pez, at least he was getting paid, I hope, for a while anyway. Unfortunately, he passed away in his mid-50s, so he passed away very young.
Yeah, he called me, but somehow I got in touch with him. Maybe somebody called me and told me he was dying. He was in the hospital. And I called him and talked to him and, said goodbye to him. And, it was sad. His voice, when I was talking to him at the last, his voice was very, very weak. And, he wasn't doing a poor, pitiful me. He was, he was trying to be upbeat, but he knew it was the end. And, we talked about the good times we'd had back with the Poffos. And we did have good times because, believe me, you remember them because they're few and far between. Anytime you're around Angelo Poffo and Randy Savage at the same time, my God.
You guys found good times in between there, huh? Look, that's good.
Oh,
it's always good to latch on to somebody you can enjoy life with, right? And of course, Bob Orton's there at the time. And you have a few friends hanging around, so that made for better times, I would imagine. And having Pez kind of join in there as another friend, and you guys even chilled out and lived together for a little bit there during this period. That's kind of cool to know because I didn't know because we haven't really talked about Pez up to this point on the show ever. And so I was like, man, I hope I don't name drop Pez. And Bob goes, I don't really remember. I remember him, but I don't remember him. And I was like, oh, that's great. When you're like, oh, I know Pez. We were friends. I said, that's awesome. I love it because he was one of my favorites growing up, like one of those underdog guys, right? Like where everybody's like, Pez Whatley was one of your favorite. I didn't say he was my top 10, but I always enjoyed when he was on the screen. I knew I was going to get a good match, and I always enjoyed watching him.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that, Ray. I really am, because I often wondered about what kind of response. I know Pez. I know people liked him. Pez always worked as a babyface when I was with him, but I'm glad to know that he had respect and affection from fans because he was a good guy. And I'm not saying that there's a lot of people in the wrestling business that aren't good guys, but I don't know, to find a really good guy through and through is hard. And it might have been the amateur wrestling background that gave me more respect and regard for him, because again, you can't do that you just can't do it if you don't have character. Mm-hmm. So knowing that, automatically I have respect. Even guys I might not like, say a guy's a world champion, but he's a jerk, I still respect his ability. I might not want to have anything to do with him personally.
Sure.
But I got to give him respect for his ability because he had to work just as hard too, in order to get there. It's an incredibly difficult sport. There's just no way to go around it.
I tapped out in high school. I said, I'm good with this. So I'll let other people do it. Yeah, no, I get it, man. I remember the afternoons that I spent training to wrestle, and I said, you know what? I'm good. A couple of years, I did my best. I'm out of here, and just leave it to the
years?
I want to say, I want to say leave it to the pros, but I got to leave it to the amateurs, right? So I just let them; they can wrestle for me. I was moderately okay.
Good for you. I mean, I didn't know that. Well, if you did it for a year, again.
No, like a Mark, I got into it because I was a gigantic pro wrestling fan, and I knew there was a lot of differences, but I figured this is a good way to start, right, to get to the pros someday. But I did football, and I did some wrestling, and even in 12th grade for a little bit, I did baseball. I didn't want to, but everybody I knew was doing it that year. I think it was just like something to do, and I said, yeah, okay. And then after a few weeks, I said, I enjoy baseball, but I'd rather watch it than play it at that point in my life. I had too much. I was a teenager, Bob. I had, other things to do, if you know what I mean. So.
Well, I do, but I had delayed onset of puberty, so I didn't have a lot of the same motivations going for me, like girls, for example, until I got almost to my senior year. I was more involved in, I was wrestling varsity when I was 14 years old.
Wow.
And
kudos to you.
Oh, man. I remember a third match. We went against a Michigan school for the East Lansing, Michigan. Was where I wrestled, East Lansing High School. We went against a Michigan school for the blind. And I went down there and I'm looking, I look across the mat, and my opponent is a guy that's he's a great big guy. But one thing about him, he was hairy. He had more hair on his back than I had on my whole body. Sure. And I found out later the guy was 23 years old. He'd been second in the state the year before, and here I am. He's 23. I'm 9 years younger, and I got to wrestle this guy. And I went in there thinking, well, you know what? I'm abashed. I'm ashamed to admit it now, but I said, you know what? I got a chance. I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to tiptoe around and get behind him and tackle him from behind and take him down. But no. When you're wrestling against someone who's got vision impairments, what they do is they make you tie up with them. where they actually have their hands on you before they even start. And then once that big, I managed to keep from getting penned by the guy, but I remember waiting. The wrestling as heavyweight 9 times out of 10, you were the last match. I had to watch all my teammates go before my turn with a guy, and I'm sitting there chewing my fingernails down to the middle knuckle. But he didn't kill me. He just wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
It's kind of funny you mentioned vision impairment. I don't have him in my notes here, but I'm imagining you crossed paths with him eventually in ICW. Do you remember a guy by the name of George Weingeroff? Because he was supposedly legally blind as well, but he was a heck of a wrestler.
George and I knew each other real well. We partied, I want to say Harlan. There was a place that we wrestled on a Sunday, and George and I met some people down there that were fun to party with. And believe me, there was no fun on that tour at all. None. Absolutely none. Just horrible. We'll get into it. There's some funny stories that I had fun with, but it was only usually when it cost the Poffos money, which it cost me money too, but it was worth it for a laugh. But watching Angelo when he had to spend a dollar that he didn't want to was hilarious because he looked like he was going to have a stroke. But yeah, George and I we partied together, and he was fun. He was a good guy to party with, and so yeah, I knew him well too. Him and Pez, and I'm trying to think who else. I don't remember, but yes, definitely George and Pez. In fact, George and Pez and I the three of us would party in that town I'm talking about. We'd party together. We'd get a room, maybe a hotel or motel, get 2 rooms. And you mentioned those names, and I knew them better actually than I knew anybody else. I mean, I already knew Ronnie, of course, and Bobby. Malenko wasn't there with us, but Ronnie and Bobby, of course, I knew all right. I never did get to know Randy Savage very well, or Lanny, or Angelo. But, Pez and George and I got to know each other because we were the boys. We weren't management. All the guys, Izzy Slapowitz, some of the other guys that were there, we all were sharing the misery together. So I think Angelo Poffo was trying to make things so miserable was a way to kind of divide and conquer, which is a strategy in war. The way to beat your enemy is to divide your enemy if you can.
Yeah, Angelo didn't believe in boosting morale. What's morale, huh?
Yeah. But what he didn't realize he drove us together.
Yeah.
Our common misery was such that, we get together, we could talk for a half hour about what an asshole he was, just that day,
Right.
Can you believe what he did tonight? Oh my God. Yeah. That's some funny stories.
I love it.
George and I had a separation, the political divide.
Okay.
But my memories of, and I don't know, maybe that's been years, it's been 8 or 9 years ago, but I still have those memories are still fond memories. So even if my opinion of someone changes for some reason, the memories don't change because, at the time, we were getting along or whatever.
Sure.
And any differences weren't there. And why go back and trash all your memories? Sometimes it happens when you get old and you have dementia or Alzheimer's. It's not your memories you get trashed, but sometimes your family, your children, your family, your brothers and sisters, maybe, if the last years of your life are somewhere where you don't even know who you are. I heard an expression one time, the memories that were formerly in color turn into black and white because they're kind of diminished. And that made sense to me. So anyway, yeah, George was another good guy to be with on the road. But, we had fun together. We could laugh and, we would have some party favors, a few beers maybe, and who knows what else, whatever was available. You know what it was? We were able to forget the business for a few hours.
Sure.
And just have some fun. So, yeah, I have fond memories of those guys. Thank you for bringing them forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to have plenty more to talk about them when we get to the ICW portion. So I'm looking forward to bringing those names back up here probably by next episode. So I'm looking forward to that. Now that I know you've got memories in there, I can't wait to unlock them. And just real quick, though, George Weingeroff, the whole legally blind thing, true or a little bit of a work?
Well, I think legally, yes, very possible, but it wasn't a work. He did have impaired vision. That's what they use. Now they don't use blind anymore. They use visually impaired.
Right.
That's special education. You learn a different language.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com. And to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Pro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Pro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
You know, I can't see you right now as we're recording, but I feel like a smile is upon your face. I'm dropping some names here that, you know, you have great fond memories of, which is awesome. It's always great to get into those talents. But now I'm going to mention a few talents that just kind of came through here. You guys were basically grabbing anybody you could at this point in time to try to fill out the cards and put some decent talent on there. some of the people that come through. By August, you guys are in business maybe 2.5 months. Bob Orton's brother, Barry Orton, joins the promotion. So Barry-O now here as well. Don Carson going to come through for a few weeks in September. I was surprised to see that. Tiger Conway Jr. stepping through here. A guy by the name of Steve Cooper, who I think I did some research on him once upon a time. I don't remember a whole lot about him other than I know I've seen some matches of him working up for the Sheik in Detroit. He also worked for the ICW for a while after you're gone, even eventually becoming a manager of the Macho Man in the early 80s. Do you remember any of those names coming through All-Star? Steve Cooper, Tiger Conway Jr., or even Don Carson making a run through here?
I vaguely remember him coming through. I'm curious. Maybe Don was semi-retired, Don Carson. I'm not sure about
because he would become a manager in the 80s. He would would basically manage the Mongolian Stomper wherever he went, and then he would even go down and work Southwest, come through Georgia, had a feud right near the end. I guess he had gotten married right around the beginning of 81, and he comes through, I guess the story is, and he asks, "Can you guys book me? I need a few bucks for my honeymoon." And they have him come in there, and he's managing the Stomper initially. Stomper leaves, and Carson sticks around for a few weeks to feud with Dusty Rhodes. So it was the manager, Don Carson, versus Dusty Rhodes, who he'd been calling Fat Boy on TV, going into their bull rope match at the Omni. You can imagine that Don probably paid for that and earned his money that night, but hopefully he had enough money to have a good honeymoon.
Yeah, he picked parts of the bull rope out of his butt. Yeah. Yeah, well, good for him. Don was one of those guys, just thinking about him, I get a smile on my face because he was always fun. His idea of the way to represent himself was always upbeat, always had a smile, always was looking for some way to rib in a fun way, not in a nasty or put somebody down way, but just to have fun. And I always liked that about him. I not only saw him here in this country, but we were together in Australia for a while too. Okay. And it was the same over there, just a good guy, someone that was, and that was what was to me was so interesting about the business was some of the people that didn't have the big name. Well, let's go back among the very people we're talking about. Randy Savage had a tremendous success, especially, compared to me, but especially compared to Don Carson. He had tremendous success, but I think Don was probably 3 or 4 times happier as a person than Randy was. His life, what that means is that your life isn't just your wrestling career. It's what went on before your career started and what goes on afterwards when your career is over. Mm-hmm. What kind of person are you? And with Don, I think that wherever he went, he had himself, and he was a good guy. He was always looking for a way to laugh, make other people laugh, and not in a cruel way, but in a good-hearted way where everybody was having fun. So yeah, fond memories, and those are the kind of people I wanted to hang around with because they're fun. You're not going down the road with someone like Angelo Poffo, the miser. I got a story down. I don't know. I'm going to have to talk to you in private about about a story with Roop Rogers. Was another guy we haven't mentioned yet.
No, but we'll be getting there for sure.
Okay. Well, I won't say it. I won't go into that now. But anyway, yeah, with Don and Pez and even George Weingeroff, same thing. Guys were looking. We weren't riding down the road going, oh, poor miserable me, life sucks. We were looking for ways to laugh and have fun, and sometimes maybe it took a few beers to get there, or a little bit of a party time. But whatever it took, if it took some help, chemical help, well, then we look for it because our whole society does that. What is it? What is a 3 martini life?
At this point in your career, the All-Star situation and the ICW stuff, I can't necessarily blame anyone for needing a little recreational help to get there. But it's good that you guys form such a bond, because a lot of people, when they think ICW, because the stuff that exists is mostly from the early 80s, and Bob, you had left to go to Bill Watts by that point. So you're not really on the footage that's out there in the public. And so when they think of ICW, they do think of Randy Savage, Lanny Poffo, but George Weingeroff, Rip Rogers, Pez Whatley, those guys stuck around there. And so you're name dropping all these guys. Izzy Slapowitz. These guys were there when you were there too. So I'm looking forward for the next couple episodes as we continue on. when we morph from
great.
All-Star into ICW. I can't wait to get into all of those guys and talk about all these stories. Yeah, it's going to be a great time. But to get there, we got to get through the All-Star portion of your guys' run here, your attempt to take over the Knoxville territory, or at least have a great competition and make some money for the boys at the very least. Right. And we're still looking at some of the names that come through. It's so odd because you talk about how you guys were pariahs, basically. Nobody wanted to touch you. Nobody would call you, but you would see these wrestlers who worked for the NWA stop through. Don Carson was a huge Fuller guy. He had worked Alabama the majority of his career, really working on and off for the Fullers and whatnot down there in Gulf Coast and eventually Southeastern. And here he is. He's stopping through. No big problem here. He goes back and gets to work for him again. Tiger Conway Jr., his father, a legendary figure in Houston. And Tiger Conway Jr. coming through here at this point in time as well. So it's just funny to see, yes, you guys defected, so it makes sense that Barry O, Bob Orton's brother, would stop through. But some of these other names surprised me. Another guy wrestled mostly as Yasu Fuji, Dr. Hiro Ota at one point as well. But here you guys give him the clever name of Colonel Yankee. That's Yanky. Yankee. Get it, guys? Ha-ha. He's Japanese, of course. And he'll wind up teaming up with the Assassin, which is Roger Smith under a hood, and they'll be given the tag team titles here, the All-Star Tag Team Champions. And let me ask you, Bob, do you have any memories of Roger Smith as a talent or even outside of the ring? Because, my God, he didn't look like a whole lot physically. I mean, he had a little belly on him and whatnot, but boy, could that guy do some things for his size, and especially in a smaller territory to never really make it. Roger Smith spent most of his career under a hood. He even did a gimmick doing a Dusty Rhodes impersonation, pretty good, in Memphis as Dirty Rhodes in the 1980s. But do you remember Roger Smith being part of this?
Yes. I saw Roger, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago down at Scott Teal's get-together he was having down there in Tennessee every year. Uh-huh. I saw Roger, and we were on this a little bit. But at the time, I remember him as being a big guy. I mean, he was not particularly tall, but he was thick. In fact, under the hood, he would look like Jody Hamilton, like the Assassin. He looked kind of like him in his body. Jody might have been a little bit bigger, but Roger was, I don't know, he weighed 230, 240. Yeah, and he was a good guy, too. He went with us because he wasn't figured in with Fuller. So he was hoping to get a full-time spot working with us with All-Star. Yeah, now, you brought the name you mentioned, Colonel Yankee.
Yes.
I had forgotten who that was, and it was a buddy of mine from California working out there with Shires, Hiro Ota.
Yes.
And that's what he wrestled as out there. Do you remember the story I told you about when I was out there working for Shire, that Hiro Ota and Alexei Smirnoff and I were in this apartment, and the girl who actually had the apartment, it was her place. I was staying there with her. Okay, Jimmy Valiant had set it up for me. He had been there, staying there, and he just kind of moved me in. I had just gotten to California. Well, anyway, I told her the story. This girl weighed about 250 pounds. She's a big woman. And she slapped me, and I took her down. I mean, without hurting her. I took her down.
I vaguely remember you telling me about taking that lady down, yes.
Yeah, and so I got her down on the floor, and I'm not hurting her. I'm not putting her out. I'm not doing anything. All I'm doing is restraining her. Now she's she's not screaming, but she's cussing me like a dog. And I look up, and Ota and Smirnoff both are there on green cards, and they're looking at me. And this girl, a drop of blood fell out of her ear, and they looked. I looked up at them. Well, I saw that. I looked up at them, and both of them, they're both hitting each other. They're looking at me like I've just ripped the girl's head off, and they're going. And Oto's hitting Smirnoff. He's going, "We go now. We go now. We got to get the hell out of here."
I can picture the Scooby-Doo cartoon, the puff of smoke as they're already gone out of the
yes,
room. Yes.
Yes. Well, that's Ota. And
well, I can see how he wound up here. That makes sense then. He was a buddy of yours when you were booking in San Francisco. So you knew Yasu Fuji. Okay, that makes sense. It all ties back together. I was wondering how he randomly fit in here, but that makes sense now. How he got to All-Star was maybe a phone call from you. Or maybe a phone call from him. Maybe he heard some things, and he's like, "Hey, Bob, you think you can help me out?"
I think he called me, and I was very fortunate. A few years, I don't know, 15 years ago, whatever, I was honored with the Lou Fez Award by the Cauliflower Alley Club. He came. He lived in Hawaii. He actually came to the get together that year. He knew me and my wife Molly, and so it was so good to see him again.
Wow, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. We had a lot of fun together in California. He was another one that had a good sense of humor, and I wouldn't take people with me that were like Angelo Poffo, for example. I wouldn't take people with me.
Could you imagine riding up the road with Angelo? My goodness.
I got to tell you how Rip Rogers passed the time, but we'll have to talk to you in private about whether I could go into detail. But yeah, and I mention these guys because sometimes you see a guy, you don't see him. I haven't seen Fuji or Ota for, I don't know, 20 years, maybe 30. And to see him, we came to Las Vegas for the alley, for Cauliflower Alley thing. It was really good to see him again. It brought back all those memories, good memories. Yeah, well, that's who Colonel Yankee was. Well, good. I was getting, George McCurry, another personal friend, Oda, or Yankee, another personal friend. But Don Carson, another personal friend. But I assume they could at least tolerate me. So, yeah, that was nice. That was nice that we were able to get together there because, most of the boys, we talked about it, and I'm sure that from your end, ad nauseum from my end about how the guys would, all of a sudden you became invisible and, your name couldn't be spoken because, you might get in trouble by the promoters. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was good to have those guys, and that makes me look back at that time and reevaluate a little bit that it wasn't all misery. There were some good times there because it was good having those guys around.
So there's some of the original posters still exist from some of the earliest shows you guys ran in Knoxville back in June of 1979, and some of the names on those posters kind of raise an eyebrow because they never appear for All-Star, but it's very interesting had they appeared. One of them was Mr. Wrestling number 2. Now, many people have hypothesized that maybe you guys were just going to stick somebody under a hood and call him Wrestling 2 because you have an assassin already. So I don't know how realistic that was that Wrestling 2 was ever going to come in here. But another name which sticks out is Dennis Condrey, who was teaming with Phil Hickerson at the time for Ron Fuller, yet he appeared on one of the early posters. Now, he doesn't actually work the card. He never arrives in All-Star. But it's kind of interesting to see some of these names pop up early on. Maybe they had thought about defecting and then they changed their mind, because we hear stories of wrestlers doing that way back when, even in the 80s, when Vince was expanding and Vern Gagne was basically beginning to deflate. There was a story of Crusher Blackwell coming to, I think it was a St. Louis show, to begin working for Vince McMahon. And he gets back there in the locker room and he has second thoughts. Like, he didn't want to cross the guy who gave him, one of his biggest pushes was Vern Gagne. And so Crusher comes to begin working for the World Wrestling Federation. And then he goes, I can't do it. And he leaves. And he goes back to Vern and gets peanuts because of loyalty, I guess, which is rare in the wrestling world. But I'm looking back here and just seeing some of these guys, their names pop up on some of the early posters, and then they never actually come and show up. Was this a ploy on your guys? Like, what if we put a name on here and cause dissension? Were you guys that crafty? Or was this just maybe they were going to come in and they decided not to?
I'm mystified at the moment because I know that false booking, I had the experience, again, out there with Shire. Shire would make a habit out of booking someone like Pat Patterson or Ray Stevens, who had been out there for 15 years and been big stars, who weren't in the territory, and they hadn't been there for a while. He would book them on, this was before I took over the book, he would book them on cards, like at a semifinal, knowing they weren't going to be there. He wondered what he'd do is he would substitute. He wouldn't let anybody know until like an hour after the show started that they weren't going to be there. And what he wondered why his business had gone in the toilet, because, you keep doing that stuff. It's like if you go to see a movie and, halfway through the movie, it changes. They start showing you cartoons or something. So yeah, I don't think, and I only use that as an example, that if I had anything to do with that part of the booking, I know that I wouldn't have suggested that we list anybody that wasn't going to be there.
Okay.
Especially in this Wrestling 2, because he was hot then, wasn't he?
Yeah, Wrestling, absolutely. Yeah, he was huge
made it.
Georgia, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and TBS, and yeah.
Oh, Jimmy Carter's mother loved him, and
I believe that picture was taken. I could be mistaken, but I believe that picture was taken right around that era as well.
Yeah, so I can't imagine putting him on a card knowing he wasn't going to be there. That's like that's like killing your own promotion to do that kind of stuff. Now, looking back, I don't remember being the one making the matches then. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I do know that, and this thing's weird, I know. Once we went opposition, we became kind of a community. I wasn't a booker per se. We made it kind of a community book, which it had been all along. It had been Malenko and me and Garvin anyway. That I would, of course, make the preliminary matches, but as far as the main events, it had been the three of us. And I don't remember exactly who took over, but I know that I had gotten tired about that time. I don't know, the stress, the pressure, or whatever. But Condrey, I can't imagine him coming in there, going opposition. He was still being booked somewhere else, wasn't he?
Yeah. I would imagine, without going and looking into what he was doing right here, he was still with Hickerson, as far as I remember, which would have put him somewhere in one of the Fuller territories or Memphis,
right,
at the very least.
Right.
So yeah, he was floating around somewhere around there doing something. So it was odd to see his name, but what a random name to just pull out without him actually saying, hey, I'm gonna make the jump, and then maybe he goes back on that and continues to work with Hickerson, because they were a pretty popular great heel tag team in the late 70s.
Oh, they were.
And
yeah, they were very good.
Another name I see here, Bob, that pops up quite often. You guys had an affinity for this midget wrestling back then, the little people. Wee Willie. Do you remember Wee Willie? Because he would appear not just for the All-Star cards, but he would eventually wind up being a fixture on ICW television later on as well.
Just vaguely, and that wasn't through me. I don't know who was handling. I
see pictures of him online more often than not. Pictures he took with like Lanny Poffo and whatnot. So maybe a friend of the Poffo family or something along those lines, which would explain why he just was always around throughout the ICW years as well.
Right.
But there was something fun here, because you talked about some of the things you guys were booking in Knoxville for Fuller that he didn't necessarily care for, the sports entertainment value, if you will. And there was something that it made me giggle when I was reading the results here in the summer of 79. You guys have a Money on a Pole Battle Royal, and there's a midget match on the undercard, and both midgets participate in the Battle Royal as well. And wouldn't you know, Wee Willie, the winner of the Money on the Pole Battle Royal. And I got a kick out of it. I love that finish. And I said, man, that feels like that Southeastern Bob Roop, Garvin, Malenko type booking there. Nobody would have realized it, but yeah, there you go. He climbs up the pole, shimmies up there, and grabs the money, and I love the booking.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how that came about, but I'm laughing thinking about it, because that would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. And obviously over on the other end, Les Thatcher and Ron Fuller would have scoffed at something like that, but I love that you guys embrace that here, because that's what fans want to see. That would you can imagine the fans popping there at that W. Knox auditorium.
Yeah, well, Ron, the guys don't understand it. Wrestling is entertainment. Now, the blood and guts stuff, that does work, yeah. But for your overall good business, and we've talked philosophy periodically for our whole run together. If you want to be able to draw from your entire community, you can't make it so blood, like you can't do the hard way stuff, that Tennessee hard way and blood everywhere. And you can't be doing that all the time and expect to have people want to bring their kids, their little kids.
It's kind of weird too, their mindset, because it is blood and guts to a degree, but Ron Fuller even bringing up that Eddie Graham logic of, straight wrestling, which even Eddie knew you needed a few characters on a show. I mean, when we think about sports entertainment, one of the earliest, and we can go back to like Gorgeous George and even before that, but I think about this time period and Adrian Street adopting his gimmick That guy could
Right.
tie someone into knots if he wanted to.
Right.
But he still knew that, it was the showmanship that was going to draw the crowd, not necessarily how good of a wrestler that he was. And so I love that you all came together from different walks of life. Ronnie Garvin from Montreal, Boris down there, doing his thing for years with Eddie Graham in Florida. And then you from the amateurs, from the Olympics into, you were trained by Hiro Matsuda and that group of guys. And so you guys come from different walks of life. You all come together, but you all have a same conception of what wrestling should be. And this is what, I love about it, because I'm sure there were some great wrestling matches on that card, which doesn't hurt to have that fun little battle royal on top of it all.
Right. Well, I think something from our distant past was that one where in Oak Alley, I was with Coach John Heath, and we did a bunch of amateur takedowns, like duck unders and all that.
I love this story.
7, 8 minutes. Yeah, for about 7 or 8 minutes, we're dead quiet. Here's his voice. When are we going to see some real wrestling?
I love the irony there. You got two amateurs in there doing some amateur stuff in the ring, real stuff, if you will. Maybe a little work, obviously, but you guys are still doing real wrestling. And then one of the fans trained on pro wrestling says, when are we going to see some real wrestling? Exactly.
We're boring the crap out of them with that stuff we were doing. We didn't come here to see this. We want to go to the World Games or whatever and watch amateur wrestling. We'll get a ticket for that. We'll go to the Olympics. We want to see some pie in the face stuff, man. Get that crap out of here. So I think that's funny because it's emblematic. Yes, it's show business. And as long as I'm not going to go back too far, but some of the complaints about what we were doing with our shows, with the box, for example, with the girls in the box and that kind of stuff, that's to knock it. If you just say that's all they did, yes. But the fact that on that show, if that show lasted 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes of it was action in the ring, and it was pro wrestling type action.
Right.
I mean, it was not blood and guts, but it was moves and high spots and drama and in and out and all the shtick that goes with pro wrestling. Mm-hmm. The other stuff was just icing on a cake, and it was always at least a 2-layer, if not a 3-layer cake. The cake was always the wrestling part of it, and I don't mean amateur style like what we're talking about with me and John Heath. I'm talking about the pro style with the ups and downs, and sometimes the silly stuff, sometimes stuff that's funny in a way, the comic relief or whatever. The little person winning the battle royal or the pole.
Sure.
That to me is great stuff. When I was a booker, I got beat by women. I got beat by a little female.
Sure.
Was the one who actually covered me and got the pen. I had her up. Her feet are about 3 feet off the ground. And I'm going to have my partner bust her with some brass knucks. And she ducks, of course. And down I go. And she covers me. And 1, 2, 3. Well, the audience they loved it. They went crazy. It didn't hurt me. I mean, we were on a spot show. It didn't hurt me at all. And the people probably might still be talking about that. Hey, you hear Bob Roop on that podcast? Yeah, he's talking like a big man, but I saw him got beat by a little girl who's about 2 feet tall. So, yeah.
I don't want to get sidetracked here because I want to run through, what you guys do here as far as how your booking goes about in the year of 79. But before we move ahead, as you mentioned, little people and being pinned by a little woman, I was curious if you had heard, because you've name dropped her here when it's your go-to name for the little people. Darling Dagmar just passed away a few days ago.
I'm sorry to hear that. She was fun. She was always upbeat and she had a good mind. She was witty and she was fun to be around. Her partner, when early on, her partner was Diamond Lil. And Lil was, I believe, the heel. So, and they couldn't hang around together off stage. So I didn't see much of her, but Dagmar would go out with us and go to the bar. And, she was one of the boys and it was fun. She was, to me, I respected the fact that they were veterans. I was fairly new and they were veterans and treated me decently. They weren't treating me like I'm some rookie that has no value. Being nice and pleasant with me. And so Yeah, I had a lot of fondness for her. In fact, I liked just about all the female talent were good people because they weren't real pretentious, or the ones that were I didn't see much of, but the ones that were one of the boys or allowed us to be one of the girls, I don't know how they might put it,
Sure.
but whatever, that we were simpatico because they all had the same risk we did.
Sure.
Going out there getting hurt, being crippled. The heels, I mean, I don't know how much heat the little people got in terms of they weren't meant to get heat. They were meant to just entertain. They were more of a show. So, well, I won't get off track too far, but
no, yeah, I just wasn't sure if you'd heard that or not. I think she passed away maybe 3 or 4 days before we were recording this, and you name drop her every time you go to reference something like that. And I said, when I saw that, I said, "Oh man, I got to tell Bob."
Well, thank you for letting me know, and I want to pass on my condolences to anyone or family or anyone who knew her, and I didn't follow her life for the last 40 some years, but I know at the time she was good people and fun to be around, and one of the boys in terms of, and that's not meant to be that she was not feminine or anything. It just meant that she fit in. I mean, you didn't have to worry about.
I took it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she fit in, and we were a member of a team. All of us were together, and I'm telling you, if you got in a beef of some kind, those people didn't head for the heels. They were there helping you too. They were helping. They're picking up a chair or whatever, and figuring out some way to, defend us, make sure everybody gets out of whatever. We got into a schmozzle of some kind, that we all got out of there okay. So, yeah, I'm sorry to hear it, and my condolences to anybody out there who is feeling the loss personally.
All right. Well, appreciate you getting that in here. We'll go back to this All-Star stuff. I want to just look at some of the booking that you guys were doing. Early on, it becomes obvious. Well, Ronnie Garvin made the jump, as did a bunch of heels. Orton, Malenko, Roop. Well, we got a problem because now we have the Assassin, Colonel Yankee. We've got a lot of heels here, Bob, but not so many baby faces. Randy Savage, as you said, a natural heel, another top heel. So you've got a lot of heels and only one baby face, Ron Garvin. What do you guys do? You turn Bob Roop and Bob Orton baby face. You guys turn on Boris Malenko, or he turns on you. I'm not really sure how it works out because the champions are the Assassin and Yankee. And Malenko also manages them. So I see the dilemma here. Makes a classic instant feud because Orton and Roop already an established team in the past now, coming for the tag titles, and you guys are de facto baby faces. Now, there's not a lot of the footage out there, so I don't know how the turn transpires. I don't even know how much of a baby face you guys play it up on camera, but I do know you're the favorites in this one because it's Boris managing Yankee and Assassin with the belts. So you guys are just a month into the promotion. You realize, all right, we're going to have to make that turn. But I love that you didn't walk in baby faces because you knew the people in the city had seen you guys as heels. So you couldn't just go, okay, we're good guys now. It's not like you jump from here to Portland and you can just make that turn. You had to explain it on television first. And I love the fact that you guys did that.
Yeah, it was absolutely necessary. I hated it. I hated being a babyface. I felt, I never felt phony as a pro wrestler until I was a babyface, because then I felt like, okay, I am definitely a wolf in sheep's clothing here, because I can't even really pretend to feel like I'm a good guy, someone who's, and you know what, think about it, I'll go into philosophy just for a second here. To be a good babyface, you have to have some weaknesses, like things like trusting someone or assuming that people aren't going to be total buttheads when they get out there. You can't go out there. Otherwise, you're more like a heel because you don't have that fresh-faced optimism that life is good and people are fair and life things are going to all turn out for the best. It was hard for me to be that way because I felt like what you have to do is you have to set yourself up to be taken advantage of. And if I've been a heel and I've been the one taking advantage of people for a long time, how am I not going to be aware of how easy it is to be taken advantage of? That's what I hated about being a babyface. It was like I had to almost forget all my heel stuff in order for people to get heat on me. And also, I'm not sure how sympathetic a character I was. The people wanting to, say, well, gee, I hope Bob doesn't get beat too bad, or maybe just kick his ass a little bit and then, let him up. But yeah, that was definitely desperation. And Bobby would have been fine because he had not done a lot of promos where he had, said a lot of horrible things like I had. So,
right.
yeah, that's what the situation called for.
Yeah. And I mean, it made sense, as I sit here. It's kind of funny because even though I don't have the TV in front of me, even though I wasn't there when it happened, if you just follow the story week to week, you can kind of put the puzzle pieces together. Wait a minute. They turned face. Why would they have turned? Well, there's really nobody else to be babyface here to work the other top tag team, the heels. And so it only makes sense to put in two credible challenge. You guys are basically the semi-main every night, or the main event in some cases, depending on who Ronnie Garvin's working. As Ronnie Garvin is still the Southeastern heavyweight champion, by the way, guys, because he took the belt from Fuller with him to All-Star Wrestling, which we're going to be getting into in a not so far away episode of the show in regards to Ron Garvin, the boat, the belt, the 15 grand and all of that good stuff. But I wanted to get some of this All-Star stuff in here this week before we get to all of that. And ICW still ahead as well. So it's only about a month and a half or so into your run here with All-Star before Randy Savage is main eventing, headlining as the international, bringing his own belt, his father's belt, the international title from the ICW along with him. No explanation as to what it is or where it came from, but Randy is carrying that belt with him, the self-professed international champion here in All-Star. That footage is out there on YouTube. He's going to be working with Ronnie Garvin, who is the Southeastern champion. Technically, he doesn't really own that belt either, but tomato. And that's going to be the main event going through the rest of the summer. And they're going to have a bunch of different gimmick matches. You can imagine how fun, if you're a wrestling fan, you can imagine how awesome those matches and intense those matches likely were between Ronnie Garvin and Randy Savage.
Oh, yeah. That was excellent. Randy was, was an unknown factor to us. We didn't know what he was capable of or what kind of stuff he had in his repertoire, how crazy how far he was willing to go with that Macho Man thing. But he was excellent. He was different. He was very smart guy with that gimmick. He took it, there'd been all kinds of guys who pretended they were, crazy, wild man, or whatever. I think having the voice and that mannerism and his body language was like always, even in private. I mean, even when we weren't in the wrestling matches, we were in his house, for example. His body language would always be kind of like he's just about, he's getting a small dose electrical charge up his butt every second because he had that,
that's a good analogy.
Yeah, he was chancing. He looked like he was waiting for somebody to run around the corner and hit him with a club or something. He was always like that, even in private. It always made me wonder, looking around myself, like, where's the danger here? This guy looks like he's expecting something horrible to happen. It's not going to come from me. I mean, it can't be thinking I'm going to be the one to do it. Yeah, he was. He was paranoid. His father made him that way, and we haven't gone there yet. But there's some behavior that we'll get into in the future that's just so weird. It's so, and basically it explains. I mean, it demonstrates when I say paranoid, exactly that, because there's no other explanation for some of the behavior that we're going to get into, and probably next week or the week after. Some of the stuff he did during the time I was together with those guys.
I can't wait.
Unbelievable level of personal. I mean, you're talking about behind the scenes. We're not talking about an arena. We're talking about in real life when we had some disagreements and some things happen with promotion where there were some upsets and some rocky times. Oh man, the way he reacted and Angelo and not Lanny so much. Lanny always kind of stayed out of that. In fact, if you put Lanny and Angelo and Randy together, he said, well, we believe all these guys from the same family. It'd be hard to, I don't know, maybe Lanny looks something like Angelo, I don't know, but him and Randy are brothers. Is hard to, they don't look anything like each other at all. And they're so different. Their
I can tell you the one thing that transpired from that entire family situation and Angelo and what he did with his children and whether people say right or wrong and a lot of that. The one thing he did was he inspired them to stay together, to be loyal to one another, to be family, because wherever Randy went, Lanny would follow, right? That entire run in the WWF, Lanny Poffo was there. He may have been curtain jerking. He may have been doing jobs on TV, but he was getting paid. He had a job that entire time that ran, well, most of the run until business started plummeting at the end of 92. Finally, Lanny leaves, but he'd been there since 1985 working for the WWF. And then even when Randy jumped to WCW, I don't know if you've ever heard this one, Bob, but when Randy signed, he made them sign Lanny Poffo to a contract as well. 6 figures. Lanny never appeared one time on WCW. He never wrestled one time in all those years in WCW, but he was getting paid to sit at home because Randy Savage said, you will hire my brother or I will not. That's part of his deal. And that's loyalty. That's good. That's good family business. If I could get somebody paid just by saying so, then, there's no fault in that, I suppose.
Thank you, Ray. I'm really happy to learn that because I had a lot of admiration for Randy Savage. Randy Poffo. I had a lot of respect for his ability, his personal foibles and quirks and whatever.
Yes.
That paranoia we're talking about had a way to detract from the overall picture of a guy that was a great, he was a great man. He was a great talent, and the fact that he was so loyal to his brother, that's nice to know. That makes me. I'm glad to know that about him because. Yeah, I'm looking for ways to respect and like people. I'm not looking for ways to put them down. So it's nice to know that he was loyal like that. And and Lanny, my hat's off to you. You're making over $100,000 a year without having to take a bump, without having to leave your living room. Now that's a good job.
And I don't know necessarily up front if that was the plan. I'm sure they had planned for Lanny to come in and do things, but that's more on WCW, which was like a train wreck backstage, and they never really got around to booking Lanny into a character on the show. I believe they bought the rights I don't know if WCW paid for it or if Randy did it himself, but they got the rights to the Gorgeous George name for Lanny Poffo to come in and do the Gorgeous George gimmick. And then It never transpired. So at one point, Randy Savage and crew, they owned the Gorgeous George name because eventually, many, many years after he was with Elizabeth, he got with a young lady by the name of, I can't think of her real name, but he finally brought her in as his valet and named her Gorgeous George because it was clear Lanny was never going to come in and he owned the rights to the name. So why not use it? Right. I suppose.
Right.
And so, But yeah, it was everything he was doing for his brother. So yeah, as crazy and as paranoid and as whacked out as Randy Savage stories you can hear, you could tell deep down, at the very least, he loved his family. He loved his brother.
Well, that's good to know. I'm glad to know that. I always thought Angelo, his dad, was a little. I was Mr. Mom for my 2 boys, so Angelo and I have a lot of things in common. He was father to 2 sons, and I'm father to 3, but 2 of them I've been raising and I'm still with. So I have a lot of experience and insight to what it's like to have a hand in raising your own children. Mm-hmm. And I often wondered about Angelo's concern about his kids in terms of how it related to making money, whether making money was more important to him than the welfare of his kids. But I don't think so. And I'm just now, from what you're telling me and us are telling everybody that's listening to us, is that he did promote loyalty to family. And that's good. I mean, that's the essence of good character, because there's so many people that, especially over money, there's so many people whose families have been totally ripped apart over sometimes a piddling amount of money. But in cases where there's a lot of money at stake, there's times where relatives are suing each other, and people have been murdered and stuff like that. So it's nice to hear that, and it's nice to be able to have some nice thoughts about Angelo. Now that so many years have gone by and I've forgotten, I always forget the negative stuff. I send it somewhere where I can't even bring it up and think about it anymore. So it's nice to have some positive things to think about. And I always liked Lanny. I didn't feel close to him because we were very dissimilar in our values, but I always liked him. I always respected Randy. I didn't particularly like him, but I respected him. I thought he was a great talent, and he paid the price. When you do that, like he did, especially, I was reading about his stuff with Miss Elizabeth up there with the WWE. Mm-hmm. When you're doing that, you're all in. You're demanded you be all in every second of every day, and to do that for years, you were paying a price. I don't care how much money you're making. Your life is basically at beck and call of someone else's is driving the wagon that you're on. So I always respected the ability to do that. It's nice to know that the people that were doing it had these nice characters, had a nice character trait. And Randy had a lot of things that you could respect him for. And it's nice to know that personal qualities like loyalty and all that are something I can add to that. So thank you for that, Ray.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I just like to enlighten everyone, as to what we're talking about here. Of course, their career didn't begin and end here in 1979. So just a little discussion outside of the box, but absolutely. And so we're not wrapping things up yet, but I do want to touch on some of the things we're going to still be discussing moving forward so people have an idea of what's to come. Because if you thought the story on leaving Southeastern was something else, hey, we're not done yet, Bob, because we've got a lot of things to talk about. Because eventually All Star is going to dissolve into ICW, which was ran by Angelo Poffo, but some of you guys will become minority stake owners in that promotion, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about you guys working the W Knox Auditorium here as All Star Wrestling, drawing some decent houses from the everything I could gather anyway. Eventually, though, there's going to be a fateful night, March 15th, 1980, in which a riot will break out. We'll talk a little bit about that riot, and it's going to cause you guys to have to move your promotion, and that's when eventually you're going to move over to Lexington, Kentucky, and work with the Poffos. We're going to talk all about that. We're going to mention the Chicken Challenge still. You guys putting those out there for Ron Fuller and his group. Dick Slater, show up, Dickie. I would love to have seen that one. The Chicken Challenge, we'll talk about what that was on the next episode. Maybe we'll kick the show off with that because I know people have been looking forward to hearing the thoughts behind that and everything. But again, we're going to get back into names like Rip Rogers, Pez Whatley, Izzy Slapowitz, the Slapowitz Syndicate. Buddy Landell is going to get his start. People don't know this. Buddy got started in All-Star Wrestling in ICW.
Yep. Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm glad that Buddy was from Knoxville, and he'd been hanging around, and nice looking guy, and it's fun to be around, and so he looked like a natural for the business. But yeah, it's good. I think I'm looking forward to these next couple. Well, I'm looking forward to every show we do. I think that
it sounds like some great memories are coming though over the next few episodes.
Yeah. Oh, to be reminded, like today, to be reminded of Pez and George and all the guys of Hiro Oda. I got to tell you a quick story.
Sure. Yeah.
Oda and I were hanging out together in California. Shire had booked a show over in Nevada somewhere. We had to drive to it. I was looking at a map, and there was a way you could go if you were going to stay on super highways all the way. There was a way you could go, but you had to go like 100 miles out of your way. So I was looking. I think, well, I think I'll take the short route. You had to drive over the Sierra Nevada mountains, and when you're driving over, you have to go up, 6,000 feet, and then down around all these curves and all that. And there was one good one. There was no traffic because they'd built the interstate just for the reason because this main road was such a pain in the butt. All these took you forever to get through those mountains. So there was very little traffic. And I got in the habit of, like when I was going around the curve, in order to speed up and make some time, I was going at about, 40, 50 miles an hour. Well, I would keep my eyes open, but you go around a blind curve, I would be on the inside. I wouldn't be on the outer lane. I would be on the inside, keep my eyes open. If, any traffic showed up, I would. But one time, after, I don't know, an hour with I didn't see even one car. I'm going around one of these curves, and all of a sudden, here comes a car. And I whipped over to the right, and on the right side, well, there was a short shoulder, and then it was a complete drop off. There was no rail, no post, nothing. And when Oda looked down out of the passenger side window, when he looked down, he couldn't see any ground. All he saw was a drop off.
Oh.
That's how close we were to it. And he screamed, and so it only took like a second, and then we're on it back our way. And he's pounding on his chest and going, "Oh, Babu, Babu, oh, Babu, oh, Babu." Man. So I'm ribbing the hell out of him. I think it's so funny how, like, oh, well, what's the problem? It wasn't even close. So we get to the end, we get out of the mountains, and we're going on this road, and we're going down this dirt road, and we pull up. There's actually a locked gate blocking the road.
Wow, okay.
That we're on, and they got me. I wasn't going to turn around and go back through the house. So I've got the gate open, and we're going down this dirt road. I've got a fairly new Grand Prix. It's like a year old, and it's black, and I'm keeping it nice. We're going down this dirt road, and there's like 4 feet of dirt on each side. Well, it's a single lane. If anybody coming out of the way, somebody's got to back up.
Right.
So I'm hitting bumps, and the dust is rising up through the hood ornament, or not the ornament, the hood. Dust is popping up, and I'm getting dust all over the. Oda was looking at me. We're going to only go, because the road's so rough, I can go about 10 miles an hour. And so about every 3 or 4 minutes, Oda looks at his watch, and he's watching the odometer. He said, "Oh, you've gone another 3 miles, Bob. Very good, very good." He's just giving me all kinds of shit about the road I picked,
Right.
Very, very good choice. Very good choice, Bob. Nice choice on the road we're taking. So, yeah. You had to be there, I guess.
Good old road trips, man. You never knew what you were going to walk into. Absolutely.
We finally came out of that, and we made it to the town. But yeah, when he came to Knoxville for us, it was good to see him again.
Yeah, that's fun stuff. I mean, that's something I would imagine he wouldn't forget. I wouldn't have forgotten it.
No.
Looking down like, no thanks. I remember going through the mountains of Kentucky, and maybe not necessarily experiencing that, but something similar with my grandfather. So, yeah, it's I get it, man. That's fun times, man.
Oh, I never saw one like that.
Well, before we wrap things up, guys, I want to thank Bruce Tharp, and I want to thank a guy by the name of Wiley Gene Beard is his name there on Facebook. I want to thank them both for writing in. The last episode they listened to, we talked about your very first card ever as part of All-Star Wrestling in Knoxville. And on that card, you wrestled a guy by the name of Joe Sims. And we were mulling it over. Who was Joe Sims? I couldn't find anything on the guy. Ron Fuller even mocked it on his show. Bob Roop, who's a established name, he goes in there and wrestles some guy named Joe Sims from off the street. And so thankfully to Bruce and Wiley Gene there writing me in, and it made sense to me immediately when they told me this. They said they're pretty positive that Joe Sims was a guy who also wrestled very early in his career under the name Joe Simmons, who would go on to become Joe Malenko. He is the son of Boris Malenko. And I said, It all made sense after that because you guys needed talent. Boris Malenko, one of the guys to make the jump. And it only makes sense that he gets his son a little work there on the very first ever All-Star card. Jody Simon, a.k.a. Joe Malenko, wrestling Bob Roop under the name Joe Sims. Very cool. Yes, it is. And I've been seeing a lot of Jody Simon the last 3 or 4 years. He and Dr. Red Roberts and myself. So we have a three-way called the Three Jackoffs on a text chain that we do. We're communicating a few times every week. And I've seen Joe the last 2 years at Waterloo. He comes out and we get a chance to spend a few days together out there.
Well, I'm glad to know that. I'll have to remind him.
I was going to say, you'll have to ask him if he remembers that night in All-Star Wrestling.
Yeah.
His name doesn't pop back up again, so I'm not really sure what that was all about, but maybe he would have a recollection of, I remember that time I worked you, Bob, way back in 1979. That'll be interesting to see if he has any information on that, like his side of the story. But that's kind of cool that we figured the question out as to who was Joe Sims. Now we know it was Joe Malenko. Very cool stuff.
Yeah.
And
it is. Yeah, keeping it in the family. He might have come up to pick up his dad. I think Larry might have left not long after that. His wife would have been Joe's mother, but he had some kind of problem in the family. Somebody was sick or ailing or whatever. But anyway, well, that's good to know. I'm glad to know. I feel good knowing I worked with Joe way back then because, he's a good friend now. Good memories, real good stuff.
Well, as we get ready to wrap things up here, other things that we'll be touching on for people that are curious, later on in 79, October, Ron Fuller going to be granted a temporary restraining order against you guys. Your guys are killing him inside. He can't handle it. So we'll get into that. We'll get into some of the things that were put in the newspapers locally there that it was the beginning of the end for the Knoxville territory as the fans were reading the papers and seeing, I thought these guys were big bad wrestlers. And they're in here suing each other and this, that, and the other. And it kind of, like I said, the beginning of the end in regards to the Knoxville territory at this point. And we'll talk about some of the changes that go on for Ron Fuller. But specifically, we're going to continue to invest our time in the All-Star territory and in ICW. But that also means we will, yes, indeed, be getting into, as promised for the last couple episodes, the lawsuit between Ron Fuller and Ron Garvin. That's going to be fun in and of itself. So lots of great stuff coming, Bob.
Oh, yeah. And some of this is, I don't know if it's news or if it's just something I've forgotten, but some of it sounds like it's going to be pretty interesting to learn myself. Mm-hmm. I do remember, hearing from Ronnie about the lawsuit. He had to be in court, of course. And I remember him at the time telling me about it, but interesting stuff. We had talked about being accused of the treason for no reason, about being greedy. And I think that just not being on the defensive here, greed wasn't really the motive. I've talked before about the idea of having a union was basically to have some leeway, to have some latitude in our own careers, because you had no say-so at all. You either did it their way or hit the highway. And now we didn't know it at the time, but at the business where if one promoter was absolutely, if you'd done something so horrible that you could get all the promoters to agree. Now, I'm not sure they could have ever done that because in hindsight, if you could make money, you were somebody was going to be.
That was proven time and time and time again. Right. Yeah. Right, if you could make money, if you were talented enough, you were always going to have a job somewhere.
Yes. But, you at the time, what you're hearing is the chapter and verse and this party line is handed down from promoters. You better not ever go opposition or even think about it because you'll be blackballed and you won't ever work again. And, that on the face of it, that's illegal to even say that,
Sure. But this is pro wrestling. And I don't know that there was a lot of legal things going on during this time period, specifically with money, but that's another story for another day. I think we're going to wrap it up now. I think that's a good time to tie a bow on this one. And we'll come back with apparently a million more All-Star and ICW stories with all the talent involved here, because I think we finally struck some oil. Your memories are really coming to you for this era. And I'm looking forward to talking about all these guys that we just slightly touched on this week. Can't wait to hear some of the actual stories with these guys moving forward.
Well, I want to say, you just said that. I want to thank you because I always prepare for, what we're going to be talking about. I've been, if nothing else, by actually searching my memory, sending out feelers for different things to see what shows up. But I also have learned to count on you, Ray, to be organized and have a format with the timelines for this stuff. You being able to bring out those timelines and then you bring out a name, all of a sudden, I've already been thinking about, all of a sudden up comes a memory that we can share with everybody. So I really appreciate that. And I've learned not to get, I used to get a little bit, not anxious, but I want to make sure I could bear up my end of things, and be able to come forward with memories and stuff. But you make it, So, I'm not your stooge yet, but I am an admirer of your work. So thank you for getting us down the road again, Ray. You do a great job of it.
Yeah, no sweat. And I'm putting you on notice, Bob. You have a full week to come up with some stories if you can remember anything in regards to some of the guys we started touching on this week. And we'll touch more on them next week as we continue on the journey through All-Star, the end of 79, and work our way into 1980 and just continue our way down the field and just talk about everything I just mentioned. We're going to begin to touch on over the next couple episodes. Looking forward to it, Bob. Thank you so much once again.
Well, one of the things, just briefly, you're going to be interested to hear what Izzy Slepowitz cussing the miser, Angelo Poffo.
I can't wait.
Chewing him a new one. So we'll talk about that next time.
Yes.
And I want to say thanks to all the folks out there listening to us. So again, without you, Ray and I wouldn't be here. So thank you, and we appreciate you letting us into your life. Thank you, Ray.
All right, guys, that's going to wrap things up here this week. But in the meantime and in between time, I encourage everybody to go out there and friend Mr. Bob Roop over at facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. And you can find me, Ray Russell. Follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. But most of all, I encourage everybody to go over to patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. So many great gifts there, including early show releases, digital downloads, video casts now available, and so much more. Check it out over at Patreon. Help support the brand. And until next time, on behalf of Bob, we ask you guys to hold tight and see where we head next time. Right here on the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop.